quite as comprehensive as the ones in Nebraska, but one study showed that if all unauthorized immigrants left Iowa, we'd lose about $1.4 billion in expenditures, half that much in economic output, and about 8,800 jobs. And tax contributions of unauthorized immigrants are substantial, and their contributions to Social Security and Medicare in Iowa annually is somewhere between 50 and 75 million dollars, and they don't ever get that back because since they're not documented, there's no way that when they retire they can get Medicare and Social Security. Okay, the Latino businesses are also growing rapidly, and we're doing a study of Latino businesses, and they make an important contribution to the economy of Iowa as well. Okay, now I want to move on to the case study of Sioux County, Iowa, and I think it's very interesting because it really illustrates the political coalitions that develop at the local level around the issue of immigration. Sioux County, Iowa is an unusual county in that it was settled originally, amazingly, by immigrants. But those immigrants were all Dutch by and large, and from the Dutch Reformed Church. A very entrepreneurial group of folks, very hardworking, etc. It has some important aspects to it as a rural county. It doesn't have any really large population centers. It grew from 1990 to 2007. Between 2000 and 2010, about 2/3 of Iowa's counties, all rural, experienced declines in population. So something's going on in Sioux County. It's located in the northwestern corner of the state, as I said, bordering Nebraska and South Dakota and almost bordering Minnesota. And this is the really important, interesting part, and that is that in the last presidential election, Sioux County voted more strongly Republican than any other county in the United States for president. So they're clearly conservatives. This gives you some idea of the economic engine that Sioux County is. And of course, with all of that growth, particularly in the agricultural sector, the confinement livestock sector, dairying, hogs, and laying hens in particular, they have a major need for what we usually call unskilled labor. They had a low unemployment rate after the economic crash, and so we have a mini Joe Arpaio in Sioux County, and he decides that he will, on his own, no agreement with the immigration officials, start stopping people for driving while Hispanic. And all of a sudden, the cows don't get milked because everybody has cell phones, and once he picks somebody up, then everybody knows that you need to stay home so you won't get arrested and deported. And this raised some real questions on the part of, particularly on the part of the employers, but also it was a community-wide concern that they had because it was threatening the economic base of the community. And of course, for those people who happened to be Hispanic, they had some different concerns. Well, the same concerns that had some of the concerns that people had. So you see that there are concerns there that relate not only to both groups. For instance, families are being broken up when parents are deported. That's definitely a concern of the Hispanic population, but it was a concern of this conservative Dutch Reform group as well, because they're very family oriented too, you know. So they could understand why their workers were concerned. So they organized themselves and went to a Board of Supervisors meeting, and these are some of the key points that they made there. Immigration is a problem that should be dealt with on the federal level, and obviously immigrants play a major role, and it affects everybody in the county. So out of that, they decided to organize, and this was basically done by extension. They decided to organize a series of discussions to educate the population, and then eventually to go back to the Board of Supervisors with recommendations based on what they had learned. And so one of the things that they learned from the person who directs the new Iowa Center in Sioux City was that there are only 5,000 unskilled workers who can come to the United States every year on a regular basis. And that's nationwide. So we have if people have skills, there's high skills in particular, it's much easier to migrate. I think probably most of you know these stories. Many immigrants enter illegally using false documents, and sometimes they know and sometimes they don't know that their documents are fraudulent. And the employers are limited in the sense that they can't ask people, unlike the sheriff who is independent, they must adhere to legal statutes, and so they can't ask people about their documentation apart, you know, whether the documents they have are legal or not, until after they're employed. At least they couldn't at that time. I have a whole other talk on sort of answering the question, why don't they just get in line like everybody else who comes in legally? And the answer is that there are 4 countries that we don't have quotas, but there is a requirement that the people who come in as documented individuals into the U.S., no more than 5% of those can be from a single country. And the 2 countries that are most affected by that are Mexico and the Philippines. So you have up to 13 years of waiting in order to get in if you happen to be a relative of a documented person in the U.S. And the other thing is that once you're here, there's no way to become legal. You have to go back to your country of origin and get in that presumed line that exists. Okay. So what did they find out? Well, they found out that national and global changes affect community life as much as immigration. Our own neoliberal policies have something to do with that. Children are critical to the future of community relations, and schools and teachers are very important. There are, when we think about undocumented people, they are usually in families that are mixed. Some people have varying degrees of officialness in their status. They also focused on law enforcement and had the sheriff and the county attorney and the chief of police and 2 Hispanic citizens to that forum. And these are some of the things that they found there. These are not unexpected, but it was an important part of community education. And so when people are arrested for an alleged traffic violation, then they face the risk of deportation. And then they had one on economic development session, and some of the things that came out there were that they have low unemployment, partly because of this economic growth that the immigrant population contributes to. And they're hardworking, etc. So the employers didn't want to give up that workforce. The overall lessons, here are a couple, but I think if we step back, then we say that this is really interesting. Here we have a very conservative county, which probably, in which the people voted, at least indirectly, for a get tough policy on immigration, at least on the national level. But when it came down to the local level, they had a completely different perspective. Although clearly the sheriff he's an elected person, so he's responding to some of that sentiment against immigrants. So obviously there are disagreements within the community about that issue. The other part is that we might call these employers progressive, but they're certainly happy to have a cheap labor force rather than one that's paid better. So those are some of the issues and contradictions that are involved there. And the outcome initially was that the sheriff agreed to stop turning undocumented violators over to ICE. The county supervisors instigated local policies to stop racial profiling. And they began to have educational programs in the churches and the schools around the issue of immigration. The sheriff has since engaged in some backsliding, and so he publishes these little flyers that look, with pictures of people that look like they're on the 10 most wanted list. So it's still a struggle. You never, when you win, you don't win forever. You have to keep working on it. Okay, let's see. How are we doing now? My watch broke.
It's almost 9 o'clock.
Is it 9?
Not quite. I told our next panel to start 15 minutes, 15 minutes.
And it's 9, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So if we take, I'll try to do the rest of this in maybe 5 minutes, and then we have a little bit of time. Okay. Okay, now I want to talk just a little bit about some of the work that we've done and the work that we plan to do around local foods. And this is the slow food part. The other part was the fast food part. We have worked with extension folks to train them to work with Latino immigrants, basically giving them more information, like the kind that I presented here, to them so that they understand the situation of Latinos and how they can be integrated